Welcome to episode 13 of the LilyList podcast, where our goal is to be a handbook for the living. In this candid conversation, Angy Brinson, a social worker and former paranormal investigator, opens up about her journey through life's challenges and her dedication to helping others. From a difficult childhood in rural North Carolina to founding a paranormal investigation team when she was 17, and eventually becoming a social worker, Angy's story is one of resilience, empathy, and a desire to make a difference. She discusses the impact of growing up with an abusive parent, her struggles managing mental well-being, and how her early experiences shaped her career path. Angy also touches on the intersections of her ghost hunting past and her current work in social services, offering unique insights into empathy, death, and the human experience. As always, visit LilyList.com for more information on the podcast and platform. You can also contact us from the website if you have questions or ideas for people or topics you'd like to hear or see on the platform. Thanks for listening. Angy Brinson, thank you for joining LilyList.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
You mentioned a number of things that you have been part of, are part of, are doing, have done. To that end, instead of diving right into those things that you're doing now, where did you grow up? What was your childhood like? And what were some of the pivot points or impactful points that kind of steered you towards where you are today?
Yeah, I was born, grew up, and continue to live in Reidsville, a very rural town in Rockingham County. I have parents who, at least my mother, grew up and still lives in the same area. It's one of those places that tend to swallow people up. They just never leave. I hated that for the longest time, but our society, our culture, everything has gone the way that it's going now with the economy the way it is. It's a saving grace at the moment, being so close to other things and being able to save money where I'm at. But that has come with its own struggles, especially through childhood. My mother worked for fast food, graduated high school, did a year of community college, but did not graduate. My dad is originally from Annapolis, Maryland, but moved down here early in his life, but worked in factories and plants and was paid fairly well for those types of jobs. But he finished high school, but didn't finish college, but tends to be a little more educated than my mother because he liked to read various things. He did a lot of research and had a lot of experiences that she just didn't have access to living on a tobacco farm.
Yeah.
But he's also from a generation that led him to become a more hardened person. He was born in 1941. And I feel like his experiences through that led him to be more frugal, more protective. That coupled with potentially verbal and emotional abuse in his childhood.
Right at the end of World War II.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You have those hardships growing up coupled with your generation, and that creates essentially a toxic combination that you're then going to use against your own children and your wife. And so growing up, I didn't have a great childhood. He was verbally and emotionally abusive, potentially physically. That's something I'm still struggling with, and whether or not I want to title what I experienced physical abuse. But because of that, he just wouldn't allow kids over to the house, so I didn't have many friends growing up. I did have a good best friend, a very close best friend, but ran everyone away. They'd come over, they would see that he was essentially an asshole. He didn't treat them much better. He did in the beginning because he had that mask up. I've got to be this good person. But individuals slowly learned and realized that was just a mask. He would push people away. I don't believe it was intentionally, but it did happen. He ran family away for the same reason. So I didn't have a lot of family support outside of my immediate family. I have my parents. I have a younger sister. We're polar opposites in any way imaginable. My mom just, there's nothing wrong with how she grew up or not seeking further education or anything like that, but it gave me a vision of what not to be. I used her life and then how my dad was as motivation to do better for myself, essentially. I decided that I was going to go to college and get a degree and become that first generation college student. It took me a couple of times to do. I immediately after high school decided that I was going to go to school for art education, thinking that I wanted to be an art teacher. I absolutely love art, but I got to college in the mountains and I felt like all of my professors, all of my classmates were snobs. That it almost became this elite, unattainable thing for me at that point.
How much of that do you believe was actually those people being elitist versus your experience growing up and you carrying some type of bias into it?
It absolutely could have been a bias. My art classes prior to that point were very much here's a paintbrush and some paint, go create whatever you want, as opposed to in college it was, okay, here's the same supplies, same medium, but now we need you to do it in this way to look like everyone else's.
Yeah.
And maybe some of that too was maybe not so much elitism as it was confidence from having a great safety net and a great support system.
And groupthink.
And I think another thing for me at that point in my life, I had never had a taste of freedom and a means to express my true self, my individuality, to be truly independent for the first time, because my home life was very controlled and it was shaped in this tiny bubble or ecosystem of abuse, no support, various things. So when I got to college, I was going to Western Carolina. I was about 45 minutes or so outside of Asheville. I've joked before that I spent more time in Asheville than I did in the classroom. I did horribly that first year. I got put on academic probation, was at risk of being kicked out. I don't regret it by any means because I learned valuable lessons out in the real world, out in a city that I wasn't all that familiar with at the time. So I wasn't getting graded for anything, but I was able to go out and experience life and interact with people and form relationships that I wouldn't have been able to do on a college campus.
Is there an experience or two during that time that stands out with regard to shaping where you are today? Something that happened, maybe I'm thinking back in my lifetime, whether it was meeting somebody that had a massive impact or maybe an arrest, various things that might have happened, or is there anything that sort of you think back to during that time?
Well, no arrest, but it may have been a few years prior to that, but close enough to that time in my life that really it started to form a good trajectory for myself. When I was 17, I founded a paranormal investigation team.
Oh, cool.
Called the Paranormal Investigators of North Carolina, PINK for short. Prior to that, even earlier in life, I just loved ghost stories. I loved hearing people talk about these experiences with ghosts. And I'm air quoting that so hard because my definition of a ghost is not mainstream. And there's so much to unpack about that. But I loved going to haunted locations, going on these ghost tours.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's fun to experience those spooky things. But at the end of the day, I wanted to hear someone's relationship to that spooky situation. Another thing is, in my lifetime, these ghost hunting shows on TV have been really pretty popular across the last, I'd say, 33 years. So I was a huge fan of the show Ghost Hunters, and watching that, I was like, if they can go out there and do this, then I can too.
Yeah.
Little did I know that's not the way it was going to work out, because I wasn't a man with money and the
societal limitations.
Yes. And there was a whole lot of ageism wrapped into that as well, because I was 17 years old. I had barely started driving, but I was also trying to persuade individuals to let me spend the night in their house or their business or museum to hunt for ghosts.
Yeah.
I did get lucky that some people took a chance on me and allowed me to do that. One of our very first investigations was at a former funeral home in Rockingham County. And at one point it was the Chamber of Commerce. So my best friend and I, who was a part of my group or still is a part of the group, we just decided one day that we were going to waltz in there and just ask point blank, tell them what we were trying to do. And they allowed us to do so. I like to focus on is documenting what's happening.
Yeah.
I set up camcorders, IR cameras, voice recorders. I have some other equipment that's more experimental, we'll say, or was designed for things like electricians that have a very real use in those fields. But now we're saying this device can now detect ghosts, so it has to be taken with a grain of salt. Doing that, I believe, at such a young age and facing all of the stigma, all of the ageism, the closed doors, the laughter, essentially. Some people thought we were essentially crazy for doing this. That led me into my now career. I am a social worker. I've said before that I didn't know it at the time, but the way I was modeling my investigation team, we were doing social work. We were going into people's homes. We were assessing their situation. We were gathering information on their mental health. We were looking at the safety of their home, trying to ascertain whether or not they needed connection and resources out in the community. And I think I became comfortable with doing that. So moving into my career, it was very easy because I could go into a home and talk to someone about a ghost that they may have. Now I'm asking about what they want for end-of-life care or whether or not they've experienced domestic violence in their life. I got comfortable having hard conversations in a manner.
It's high empathy at the end of the day, whether you're talking to somebody about their belief in a ghost or whether there's violence in the home. It requires a level of empathy and belief to actually go forward with that. I am curious, though, you mentioned there'd be a lot to unpack around the word ghost, and since I do try to keep these conversations to under an hour, I don't want to unpack too much, but I am curious to hear a bit more about that.
So I could go on for hours about this. I'm also an atheist. I consider myself an atheist. And one of the first things I hear when I say I'm an atheist, but I believe in ghosts, is that how can you have both? To me, atheism is the lack of belief in a higher power, in a God, angels, demons, what have you. So ghosts, we don't know what they are. We don't even know if they're real. Right now, science cannot confirm, deny, prove, replicate this anomaly. I don't think a ghost is any form of higher power, period. Energy, potentially. I'm working on a theory now that it's based more in either mental health issues that are being untreated, undiagnosed, something that's being affected by alcohol, drugs, social influence and just in general that it is some kind of strange anomaly, making it paranormal. There are just so many unanswered questions surrounding this thing. I use the term ghost very loosely because that's what most people understand this thing, this anomaly to be.
It's a connective term.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And another thing about all of that is that it's cool to have a ghost in your house. It's fun. It's a party trick. However, it's not as easy to evaluate yourself, your family, your children, what's going on in your life and say, okay, I might need some kind of professional help.
Yeah.
It's easier to call the ghost hunter than admit to yourself that you need therapy or drugs to treat some type of illness or issue. I'd love to do some kind of poll, some research on this to see if there are links between political beliefs, location, religious affiliation, because I think that also those cultures, those groups, that community that you associate yourself with, I think that plays a huge impact on it. I think that ghosts transcend culture and beliefs because if you look at historically, there are ghost stories across the board. It's not just an American idea.
Yeah.
I've also spent a great deal of time in cemeteries. It's one of my favorite pastimes, actually.
Yeah.
I love to look at the headstones, the statuary, the symbols, the markings on the graves. To me, it brings me closer to the people who are there. And I'll just go do this in a random cemetery graveyard. I don't have to have family there, but it's a way to remember someone who no longer has a family here. It kind of carries on their legacy, so to speak. I've been doing something similar with old photos. Like I'll go to an antique shop and I will shuffle through old photos and pick out the ones that just appeal to me.
Yeah.
For people who have been long forgotten. I'm putting them in a photo album or a scrapbook, but I'm looking at them. I'm talking about them. I don't know their life story, but I'm remembering them in a way that they wouldn't be having otherwise.
Yeah. As you said, we could keep talking on that subject for forever, and I still have lots of things I'd like to ask you, but maybe there's another episode in the future. But you did mention you'd done some hospice work. I think that ties in a bit when we talk about ghosts. And so I'm curious, what was your hospice experience? What did you take from that? What did you learn?
Yeah, so for me, hospice was almost a dream job. I knew that when I started school to gain my social work degree, that I could see myself working for hospice or with something very closely dealing with end of life. I knew going into it that I could not work with children, that I would have to work with adults, and that my preferred population was aging adults, the elderly. I worked for a for-profit hospice in Randolph County.
Okay.
I loved the work, but hated the company.
Okay.
It was right place, wrong time, essentially. So to kind of step back to my childhood, one thing that my parents really did do right was from a very early age, when one of our older family members were sick or dying, we were there in the hospitals. We were there at hospice. We went to the funerals, the wakes, the cemeteries. I wouldn't say forced, but I was a part of all of that. So I became comfortable with death and dying and illness from a very young age. Fast forward to hospice and social work, when it comes to the death and dying aspect, yes, I'm empathetic to this situation. I do have emotions surrounding that. I'd be terrified if I didn't. However, I then become a resource, a rock for someone.
Yeah.
I am cool in that situation. It doesn't bother me.
Yeah.
It's now just to me being something that's understood as a part of life. It's gonna happen.
Yeah.
So why not be a strong support for someone going through that situation?
And experience it. So on the social work front now, I'm curious, obviously, it sounds like you faced a number of challenges throughout life, not just with the work you do, but social work now, what's the most rewarding aspect of what you're doing today? And then what's the most challenging aspect?
The most rewarding aspect by far is seeing that I make a difference in someone's life. And so many times it's on my side is not a huge deal. I've made a linkage for this person. I've connected them to some resource in the community that they maybe didn't know about. But they are incredibly thankful that I was able to do this for them. That at the end of the day makes me feel good.
Yeah.
I'm realistically speaking, I am this tiny grain of sand in this universe.
Aren't we all?
We are.
Yeah.
I'm never, I say never, I mean, anything could happen, honestly, but the likelihood of me leaving a legacy on a macro scale isn't very realistic. But on a micro scale, dealing with my current caseload, my previous caseloads at other jobs, I have had positive relationships, impacts with people that improved their lives significantly. So I may not be remembered on a grand scale, but in some way, through making those connections and getting those resources, really leaving behind something to remember.
Isn't it funny we can talk about us being grains of sand and then also talk about a grand scale, which that's always a challenging part to me, is that I think we forget that there's no such thing as a grand scale for each of us individually.
Right.
And so, yeah, so that's good. And then biggest challenge that you're seeing.
The biggest challenge for me is having to realize that I cannot make someone do what they don't want to do. I can observe their situation and be like, okay, you would benefit from this and this. Your life would be exponentially better because of this and this. But I can't make them do the work to get there. They have to do it of their own accord. And I think realizing that I have to take that hands-off approach and say, this is your life, that's hard. That is very hard.
It's funny you saying, so I want to shift into legacy, but before we get there, I think most of what I've heard you talk about during our conversation is really around the impact you've had on other people. I haven't heard a lot about you yourself. And I'm curious, if you look back, before we get into legacy, if you look back over your life, am I missing the boat there? Or is there something about your journey to this point where you've really almost singularly focused on the impact you've had on others versus the impact you've had on yourself?
So that's a tough one. I feel like I'm in a therapy session right now. I have suffered from depression, anxiety, a whole slew of mental health issues, I'd say most of my life. Starting around 13 to 15, I started experiencing suicidal ideation. I thought that I'd be better off dead. I couple that with an abusive father who says I'm not worth shit to him, that I'm not enough. I learned to regard caring for myself as something on the back burner. I had learned to cater to his needs and keeping the peace and walking on eggshells and trying to minimize the verbal attacks that I essentially started thinking that I wasn't worth it. I focused so much on him that morphed into viewing other people's needs and desires more important than my own.
So if we think about legacy going forward, there's a lot just in what you just said versus all the work you've done, what you are doing, where you want to go. What does legacy mean to you? What do you want it to mean to you?
So that's an ongoing process for me. Right now, the blanket idea is to help as many people as I possibly can in whatever way that may be. Whether that be career-wise. Right now, I'm a case manager for a Medicaid program, so I have the funding behind me to deliver supplies, services, you name it, to individuals. But also in my personal life, if someone's really struggling, just being there, giving them the gas money they need to get to work tomorrow, just allowing myself to be that resource for them when I didn't have it for so long. But that is exhausting.
I was going to say.
It is exhausting. It's draining. It's like between my job and wading through what's happened to me in my own life, I'm facing severe burnout right now. I graduated with a social work degree in 2021. This is my third job since then, and I feel like I could throw it out the window tomorrow. It shouldn't be that way. I love what I do. I love the relationships that I have with my clients. But I am also slowly learning that at the end of the day, I also have to take care of myself and work on things so that I can then turn around and pour back into other people. And that is a hard thing to do when all you've done your entire life is people please and take care of others.
Yeah, I don't have as deep-seated challenges, but I went through similar stuff. I was going to say, you mentioned, when someone's really struggling, you want to be the person that's there for them. And my question would be, when you're really struggling, do you have people that are there for you?
I have people who will be there, who offer to be there, who would be solid shoulders to cry on.
Would you reach out to them?
That's it.
Yeah.
Not always. I'm a lot better at it now than I've ever been in my life. But I still view it as, if someone helps me, I view it as being in debt to them. So I want to financially reimburse them, or if they've gone out of their way to do this grand gesture for me, let me then in turn do something of equal caliber for you. And realistically, that can't happen all of the time.
Yep.
But I'm trying to take baby steps. And now I'm at a point where, okay, you've helped me do this task. 6 months from now, you now need help. So just going back and forth, like allowing there to be a give and take. Whereas before, I couldn't ask for that give. at all.
Yep. I think it gets a little easier as we get older. So I won't say older, maybe more experienced. On the legal side, life and legal, wills, living wills. How are you doing on that front? As a social worker that probably gives people guidance.
Yes. So I am excellent at giving advice, but I cannot take my own advice.
Yep.
It's like I preach self-care up one side and down the other daily, but I can't do that for myself. So mirroring that and looking at this legal paperwork that I know is extremely important. No, I haven't. Like, I know what I want, but I have not legally done anything about it. And wills, advance directives, all of that, they're so important, so crucial. It takes so much weight and trouble and guesswork out of what your family or friends have to do for you once you're gone. I just need to get on the ball with that.
How about capturing your story? You've got a great story, and by great, interesting, there's challenges there and things, but do you journal? Do you capture anything like that?
I journal very casually. My problem is that I have all of these great ideas of how to get my story out there or to do something more beneficial with it. But because of the mental health struggles, because of the burnout, I just find myself not having the motivation to do it. I have these grand ideas of writing books. More recently, I've thought about a memoir. Previously, I had decided that I was going to write a book about my ghost hunting experience.
Yeah.
Because I have a unique story to tell there.
Yeah.
I've even wanted to write and illustrate my own children's book to explain death in a very palatable and age-appropriate way to children. I've got the ideas. I've got the know-how. I have the tools. I just haven't been able to get it out.
You and I are similar in that I'm very much someone, I make plans. Even these interviews today, it's really exciting. Make the interviews, get it scheduled. And as it gets closer and closer, you dread it. And then it's, I don't know if I feel like doing this. And then once it happens, it's, oh, that was great. And so I'd love to read anything you come up with. And I've also got ideas for books. So if you want to partner up and have accountability buddies, we can do that together. So
that's awesome. I need all of the accountability buddies I can gain.
Is there anything, places to people find you online or anything like that? Or
so I don't really have a big virtual presence.
Which is smart.
I would like to, but that will come when I start publishing things. I tend to keep a very private life. I value my close friendships and relationships, but as far as sharing that with a larger audience, I'm just not there yet.
Yep. I have actually more of a digital presence than I would like from over the years, but as far as like social media stuff and everything, it's a challenge for me trying to launch a business because so much of it revolves around that, but I need to get better about it. So, but okay. Thank you, Angy. I appreciate your time and the honest sharing, and I do sincerely think you've got a great story so far. It challenges everything else, and there's a lot of great stuff ahead. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. It's been my pleasure.
You can't hang on to yourself. You don't have to try not to hang on to yourself. It can't be done, and that is salvation. The most important thing for anyone to realize is that you and every person you see will soon be dead.